You've been waiting, checking your phone, replaying conversations in your head, wondering why someone who clearly had feelings for you just went silent. Here's what nobody tells you. The avoidant hasn't forgotten you. In fact, they might want you back more than you realize, but there's something they're waiting for first, something they will never say out loud, something most people never figure out, and because of that, they lose the connection forever. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you're going to understand the avoidance mind in a way that finally makes everything make sense. You're going to stop guessing. You're going to stop spiraling. And for the first time, you're going to see this situation clearly, not through the lens of fear or hope, but through the lens of real psychology. What you're about to hear might be uncomfortable in places. It might challenge some of the things you've been doing, but it will also give you something far more valuable than false comfort. It will give you clarity. And clarity, even when it's hard, is always the beginning of real power. So take a breath, and let's get into it. Here's the first thing you need to understand about avoidant attachment, and it's the foundation everything else builds on. When an avoidant pulls away, it is not because they stopped caring. It is actually, in most cases, the complete opposite. Avoidants have a deeply wired fear that closeness leads to pain, not because they are cold or emotionally empty, but because somewhere in their past, love came with conditions, pressure, or loss. Their nervous system learned early on that getting too close to someone meant eventually getting hurt, so it built walls not out of cruelty, but out of survival. So what happens when they start genuinely feeling something real for another person? Their nervous system sends an immediate alarm, something that says, this is getting too real, too close, too risky. And instead of leaning in like most people would, they disappear. They don't pull away because the connection wasn't real. They pull away precisely because it was. This is the painful irony of avoidant attachment. The deeper the feeling, the stronger the urge to retreat. The more they care, the more danger their subconscious perceives. So the silence you have been sitting in, the distance that has been eating at you, that silence is not indifference. That silence is fear wearing a very convincing mask. And once you truly internalize that, everything they do begins to make a completely different kind of sense. Now let's talk about what's actually happening on their side during this silence. Because if you've been wondering whether they even miss you, whether you cross their mind, whether any of it was real to them, the answer, in most cases, is yes, and it is more layered than you might expect. Research on avoidant attachment consistently shows that avoidants do experience longing, regret, and deep emotional connection. They simply process it entirely internally and privately, in a way that is invisible to the people around them. Where someone with an anxious attachment style expresses their feelings outward through texting, calling, over-explaining, sometimes desperately reaching out, an avoidant turns completely inward. They sit with the feeling alone in a room no one else is allowed into. They convince themselves they're fine, that they made the right call, that the distance is what they wanted. But here is what actually starts happening after real time apart. The thing that triggered their withdrawal in the first place, the pressure, the emotional intensity, the perceived loss of freedom, that slowly starts to fade from the front of their memory. And what remains, quietly sitting underneath all that noise, is the warmth, your energy, the way things felt between you when it was easy and light and real. Avoidants are deeply prone to romanticizing past connections once the immediate threat of emotional closeness no longer feels present. So yes, they are thinking about you, but here is the part that matters. Thinking about you and actually coming back to you are two very different things, and what bridges that gap is exactly what this video is really about. This is the part that changes everything, and it is important that you sit with this one slowly, because it is the core of everything. The hidden condition that most people never identify and therefore never actually meet. The avoidant wants to come back. They feel the pull toward you, but they have a condition attached to that return, a condition they will never verbalize, one they may not even be fully conscious of themselves, one that lives entirely in the realm of felt experience rather than logical thought. What they need to see, what they are silently and carefully watching for, is that you are genuinely okay without them.
not performing okay, not pretending to be okay, actually grounded, recentered, and okay. Because the avoidant is not going to re-enter any dynamic that still feels emotionally unsafe or suffocating to their nervous system. And from where they stand, emotional unsafety looks like someone whose entire stability depends on their return. Someone who is visibly anxious, someone who feels destabilized by the distance, someone whose happiness is sitting entirely on hold waiting for them to come back. That energy, even when it comes from the most genuine and loving place, triggers their withdrawal response all over again the moment they sense it. So they wait. They watch from a careful distance. They notice your energy when they do occasionally reach out in small ways. They pay attention. And what they are looking for, consciously or not, is the quiet but unmistakable signal that you have found your footing again, that you are not falling apart, that you are not frozen at the door waiting. And the moment they genuinely sense that shift in you, that is when the avoidant begins, slowly and carefully moving back toward you. Now here is where most people go wrong, and this part is important to hear not as a judgment, but as a real and honest reflection, because the mistakes people make while waiting for an avoidant to come back almost always come from a place of genuine love, and that is what makes them so painful to address. The first pattern is over-communication. Long messages, emotional explanations, requests for clarity, reaching out to check in one more time. Each of these feels completely reasonable and justified from the inside. From the avoidance side, however, every single message confirms the exact thing they were afraid of. It tells them this connection comes with pressure, with emotional weight, with a level of need I do not know how to hold. And each message, no matter how lovingly written, quietly reinforces their decision to stay distant. The second pattern is performing healing, posting on social media, going out, acting unbothered, but doing it entirely as a strategy, entirely for an audience of one. The intention behind it leaks through. And avoidants, whose nervous systems are extraordinarily finely tuned to detecting authentic safety versus performed safety, can often feel the difference between someone who is genuinely returned to themselves and someone who is putting on a show. The third, and perhaps most quietly destructive pattern, is waiting in a completely frozen state, keeping life on pause, making no new decisions, holding everything still just in case they come back tomorrow. This creates the most stuck, stagnant, and desperate energy of all, and it is felt even across distance and silence. The truth that nobody wants to hear is this: you cannot convince an avoidant to return through words or gestures or strategy. You can only shift the actual energetic reality they are sensing from you. And the only authentic way to do that is to actually start healing. So what does it actually look like in practice? This thing the avoidant is waiting for, this inner shift that has nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with truth. Because it is easy to say, do the work and leave it vague, but real transformation needs to be concrete, needs to be felt in the body and lived in daily choices, not just understood intellectually. The first and most immediate step is reclaiming your nervous system. Because the anxiety of waiting, the hypervigilance of checking, the low hum of hoping, all of that lives physically in your body and keeps you locked in a state of chronic stress that radiates outward in everything you do and every interaction you have. Breathe deliberately, move your body, prioritize sleep and food, come back to baseline. You simply cannot attract a secure and healthy reconnection while operating from a dysregulated survival mode state. The second step is rebuilding your identity outside of this connection, because when a relationship, or almost relationship, becomes consuming, we quietly lose the thread back to ourselves, our interests, our friendships, the things that once lit us up before this person entered the picture. Finding those threads again is not moving on, it's coming home to yourself. The third step, and this is genuinely the hardest one, is allowing the outcome to become uncertain to you in a real and felt way. Not performed uncertainty, not strategic detachment, but arriving at a place through honest inner work where both outcomes, their return or their permanent absence, feel survivable, even if one is still preferred. And the fourth is learning to communicate from fullness rather than from lack, with warmth and calm rather than urgency or hidden desperation, so that when contact does happen, it carries an energy the avoidance nervous system reads as safe. So let's talk about what actually unfolds on the other side of this work, because after everything, after all the inner recalibration and the releasing and the genuine returning to yourself, one of two things happens, and both of them are worth understanding clearly before you arrive at that place. The first is that the avoidant re-enters, slowly and almost always quietly at first, a casual message, a small, almost throwaway check-in, something that on the surface looks insignificant and might even feel disappointing in its smallness. But do not mistake the smallness of it for lack of meaning, because for an avoidant, the act of reaching out at all is enormous. It is the result of an internal battle they fought entirely in silence. They are testing the waters carefully, checking whether the emotional climate has changed, sensing whether it's safe to come a little closer. And if you meet that moment with genuine warmth, without flooding it, without making it immediately heavy, without rushing to collapse the distance all at once, the door opens a little wider. Trust is rebuilt slowly and quietly, the same way it was originally built. But here is the second thing that sometimes happens, and it is the outcome people fear most, but often find the most quietly freeing. When you do real healing work, your perspective begins to shift in ways you did not predict. The longing starts to soften. The story you were telling yourself about this person, about what you had, about what you needed from them, it becomes clearer, less filtered by pain and longing. And sometimes what you find on the other side of that clarity is that the version of them you were waiting for may not fully match the version that actually existed. Either way, whether they return or whether you find you have grown past the need for them, the most magnetic, most grounded, most irreplaceable version of you is the one that is fully anchored in itself, not waiting, not performing, not shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, just whole. And that version of you never has to wait for anyone.